Carol had liked and collected stuffed animals, but was now giving them one by one to Chrissy. The dolls looked like collector's items and probably came with Magda from Russia. He had to admit that the dolls were beautiful. He glanced at his watch. It was 11:30, almost Christmas. He felt a sharp, stabbing pain in his right thigh and almost cried out. It was Edgar A., again hanging on his leg, showing off his claws, but not deeply enough to draw blood. His cockeyed, quizzical eyes looked up at him, and James couldn't help laughing. "Yeah," he said, "very impressive. I saw your claws the first time." He followed Edgar A. down the stairs and back to the living room. After a cursory going through of the kitchen, there was only one place to check. The rustling sound started as soon as he stepped toward the cellar door. Edgar A. didn't like it, but James raised the crowbar. "It's got to be done, partner. I left the back door open for you." And the cat backed out of the room, the hair on its back raised. James turned back to the cellar door and found himself face to face with Magda Ivanovich. Actually, it was only half of her face. Her voice was a horrified whisper. "No, no, you must not." He blinked, startled, and the face was gone. Again he laughed at himself. The face hadn't really been there. It was just the power of suggestion or something like that, he was sure. He checked his watch. Midnight. Merry Christmas. To hell with the scuffling sounds, he thought, and went after the padlock with his crowbar. He wasn't afraid of any damned rat. He'd seen rats the size of small dogs in Baghdad. Make a threatening move and they run. If not, well, he had the crowbar. The old hasp popped from the thin, rotted wood with no problem. He may not even needed the crowbar. The door to the cellar stairs slowly creaked open, revealing absolutely nothing on the other side except an old straw broom, a rusty metal bucket, and a fossilized rag mop. The stairs took a sudden right and led to the patch black of the cellar below. He turned towards the kitchen. "See," he said to the cat, who was now long gone, "I told you there was nothing to be." He blinked. Magda Ivanovich's form stood in the doorway. Her remaining eye was wide with terror. Her hand covered what was left of her mouth, and she shook her shotgun-ravaged head "No" over and over again. He blinked, but she was still there. Something rubbed against his right thigh. He glanced down, half expecting to see the cat. Something long and thin slithered around his ankle in the darkness. Something grabbed his other ankle, and he was just about to shine his flashlight down to see what it was, when something grabbed both of his wrists from opposite directions at once. With a swift yank, James's body was pulled violently backward and into the back wall of the basement stairway. He was then turned at a 45-degree angle and with his back to the stairs until he faced the little shelf next to the door. With another swift yank, he was knocked backwards and dragged, head first, down the cellar stairs, fast enough and hard enough to rush through the railing at the 45-degree turn and continue into the air before dropping into the darkness like a dud scud. He crushed into the wet gravel of the basement floor. Then he heard them. Rats. Scurrying everywhere, twittering, chattering, sometimes fighting among themselves. Former Corporal James A. Weinman of the United States Army, and now one sorry sack of shit. His ankles and wrists were tied tightly with some kind of electrical cord. He saw the glass bulbs attached to the cords. Christmas lights? He was tied with Christmas lights? "Who's there?" he called out. Who the hell blindsided him? "Look, we can talk. I just know. Wanted to check the place and make sure everything was all right. Hello? Is anybody there?" At the top of the stairs he could see Magda Ivanovich, her hand still pressed to her mouth, shaking her half head over and over again. James was flat on his back and felt his legs spreading apart, and then his arms until he was completely spread-eagled. Casting a yellowish glow over the ancient cellar, a kerosene lamp hanging from one of the support pillars flickered slowly to life. No one lit it. The lamp had come to life by itself. Something was moving on the opposite wall. James craned his head up to see what was happening and saw the red wooden fruit cabinet tilting back and forth, and then left and right. With a loud glass shattering crash, the fruit cabinet fell forward, revealing a badly patched cement wall. The patch looked wet, as if the cement had never cured. The more he looked at it, the more James saw that it resembled the silhouette of a man. The man seemed to be wearing a cap and a long flowing beard. At the top of the stairs, James could see that Magda, or Magda's ghost, was gone now. He pulled his bindings. No good, the knots were tight and secure. He thought for a moment about the way he had been shanghaied at the top of the stairs. It must have taken at least 2 people. They must have come up from the cellar. But the cellar hadn't been opened for years. A giant rat sauntered into the pool of light in front of him and started sniffing his crotch. More rats were growing bolder and entering the light. He couldn't hear them, the twittering chirps getting louder. Their eyes reflected the light of the lantern. What had they been feeding on, he wondered, when something squiggled across his left shin bone. More rats. Maybe they'd been feeding on each other, the big ones eating the little ones, cannibal rats. "Get out of here," he shouted at the rats. "Go on, get out of here, get." Unimpressed, the rats continued moving forward. On the basement wall, the stain had changed. It was as if the silhouette of the man with the beard had turned towards him. James could feel it staring into his soul and laughing. Between James and the wall, a luminous green mist began to form. The mist started to form the image of a man, or rather something that had once been a man, for the image now forming in front of his helpless before him looked like a rotting corpse. Rags of clothes hung from his skeletal body, as did clumps of dried flesh and decaying organs. It wore big boots and a big belt tied around a rotting Cossack jerkin. On the top of his head was a red and white woolen cap. Dmitri Ivanovich, Father Frost, or rather the translucent image of something that had once been Dmitri Ivanovich's body, was in fact. James knew he didn't have to be told. He felt it in a flash. It was Vasily Ivanovich, if not something much, much older. The rats tittered and chattered in joy. Their master was returning. The dog-sized rat had been sniffing at his crotch, crawled up into James' lap, sniffed at his zipper, and then continued upwards until it sat directly on his chest, staring down at him. As its beady little black eyes bored into him, James realized so very much more than he had just a few seconds ago. He understood things nobody else in town comprehended. His soul slipping away into a dark pit of hell, to be replaced by the thing taking shape before him. James got the whole story, colorful anecdotes and all. It was killing children, little girls the age of his own Chrissy, partly because it just enjoyed killing. At the realization, something deep inside James's instinct, perhaps, rallied. Chrissy, is that why Magda was interested in his family? Is that why she had approached him? Was she under the control of her dead brother, or whatever it was taking possession of her brother? No, Magda never invited Carol or Chrissy to come with James when he was working. She had prohibited James from going near the cellar. She had cats everywhere. Vasily hated cats, James remembered. Dmitri also hated them, as did, presumably, the thing that looked into the center of his soul using the body of a rat. Cats kill rats. James suddenly realized he had been suckered. What else would have brought him here? The rats moved up his chest, stood up on its hind legs, its claws digging into James' chest, and leaned into his face. Maybe to some people they make great pets, James thought, but to him absolutely nothing looked more evil. The rat's naked, hairless tail twitched twice. James could see it in his mind that night 20 years ago when Magda had, for whatever reason, ventured into the basement. She stared in horror as her brother Dmitri finished strangling the little Allen girl whom radio had reported missing only a couple of hours ago. Dmitri enjoyed killing her. It was as if the man had reached orgasm at the feel of life fleeing from his fingers. Magda stumbled back out of the basement into the living room, and then her eyes fixed on the shotgun, the one on the mantel, the one used to scare hell out of those boys from town, stupid enough and daring enough to try to sneak a peek through her windows. Walking back to the cellar, she removed the rock salt cartridges and put in real ones. She didn't even call out. As Dmitri hovered over the little girl's corpse, chopping it into pieces, she simply walked up behind him, put the barrels beneath the base of his skull, and pulled the trigger, both barrels. She buried Dmitri's body in the smaller fruit cellar, back behind the basement proper, where it turned out her brother and perhaps Vasily before him had butchered and buried so many children. The translucent green corpse of Dmitri Ivanovich shambled towards him, and the biggest of the rats began nibbling at James' chin. Out of the corner of his eye, he could still see Magda, but her expression had changed from fear to grim determination. That was when something sleek, black, unbelievably fast, shot off the broken basement handrail and latched itself onto the huge rat now nuzzling at James' throat. There was no mistaking the sound of the cat in full battle scream. The feline went after the surprised rodent with a fierceness James had never seen anywhere but on the battlefield. The rat and its attacker tumbled away into a dark corner of the basement, where the battle continued. Again James craned his neck up. He couldn't see the fight, but he could discern other cats now creeping into the basement. And then he remembered. They hadn't been able to catch all of Magda's cats. A few had escaped, and those slowly descended the stairs were a few bigger ones, which looked like ferals, attracted the scent of easy, four-legged prey. Magda's ghost seemed to be urging them on. The greys, the big ferals, started picking off the rats on the outside of the circle. The other rats noticed, and then the fight was on. The shrieks and cries of the mauled and dying cats tore at James's ear, and even his heart, like 100 sets of fingernails scratching across a chalkboard at once. Still standing at the top of the stairs was Magda's ghost, who grimly watched the slaughter of what was left of her pets. The thing that had been Vasily Dmitri Ivanovich was now whole enough to form a rictus sneer of contempt and victory, which then turned to shock, disbelief, and then to abject terror. The cats were the diversion. Old Magda had died clutching a shotgun, the ghostly counterpart of which she now held in her hands. She had only needed one barrel of the shotgun to kill herself. The other barrel exploded point blank into the thing, and then it was over. The rats scattered, as one scampering into every nook and cranny and rat hole in the old basement, vacating the battlefield. He awoke at 4 o'clock in the morning, and his hands were no longer bound. He shuffled the cats off, but a couple of the tiger-striped gray and the big ferals weren't moving. They died. James staggered to his feet, retrieved his dead flashlight, and pulled himself painfully up the stairs. The black cat Edgar A. limped weakly after him. James picked up his crowbar and regarded the wounded cat. He then hooked the crowbar through what was left of his belt. "Hell yes, you can come," he said, and picked up the bloody mess, held him to his chest, and limped back to his truck. James found an unbroken string of Christmas lights for the outside and arranged them around the window. It wasn't much, but it was something. He recovered the wreath and hung it on the door. When he re-entered, he found the pile of Christmas cards he had torn down and dutifully taped them back up on the archway leading to the kitchen. Partially hidden by the old ones were a few new cards Carol hadn't the nerve to open. James opened them up and made a